Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is WeatherBrains episode number 605 for August 21st, 2017. The pre-show, we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and occasionally say outrageous things. And I'm pumped because look who's going to be on for the whole show, Brian.
Kevin. Yes, the man in the dark.
Who came in?
No worries about television, no distractions. Your whole attention is going to be focused on this show.
That line that you just said, no worries about television, I'm going to go and knit on a pillow and put it in my reclining chair here. That's the goal right there. No worries about television.
Show title.
It could be a show. I guess it could be a show title.
It's too early for that. No.
I started out with Holy Eclipse, baby.
Yeah, let me see if I can put so Bill's gone to wherever he goes to. Where is Bill? In Peoria? Walla Walla?
I think he said he was driving back
Glendive,
South Carolina somewhere, was he?
Yeah, I'm not sure where he is. He's driving.
What percentage did you all get there?
It was 93.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Exciting.
It was a pretty good little shoe.
We were 77.9, I think.
Well, we were probably 92.9.
James, how's your book coming? I never get a chance to visit on the pre-show anymore.
It's just, slow. I mean, it's like I work from pre-dawn until midnight, and the only time I can deal with it is when I'm like off, and I'm off 3 weeks a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just hard.
Yeah,
I've worked on it for years. It's coming along. It might be interesting. It might not. I don't know. When you write these things, you have no earthly idea. So Fugate was Obama's FEMA administrator, right?
Yes.
Okay. Uh-oh, I'm hearing my voice on somebody's channel.
Hang on. It may be me. Or it may be Aubrey who's joining. I had to unplug for a minute.
Gosh, these eclipse pictures, I'll like clear out 100, and then 100 come in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I figured you'd be.
Wow, I mean, it is just mind-boggling.
Figured you'd be inundated.
All right, let's see here. I'm not going to say his email address publicly, but it's that.
The Goes 16 loop is cool.
Yeah.
In fact, I need to screen cap this.
So what was that?
What?
I'm hearing things.
It's Penny the cat.
Oh, that was a cat?
Yeah. She wants to come in.
We'll let her in.
Hang
I
on.
fed our three cats out here survive the eclipse.
Who gets
your
first?
raccoon? You have a family of raccoons too, huh?
Yeah, we've had raccoons. It looks like they have babies out there now, which is probably not a good thing. They are way too friendly. One night I was out there, Brian, and the cat was up against my leg while I was getting the cat food. I looked down there. It wasn't a cat. It was one of those stinking raccoons.
Uh-oh. Yeah, one of them.
You don't want one of those. I say you don't want one of those raccoons taking a chunk out of your leg because if they have rabies, that's not good.
No. I see we don't have to worry about climate change anymore because Trump has dismissed the advisory panel. Yeah. Get that in early.
So Aubrey, you hear us okay? You're muted, do believe.
Yes. I'm sorry, I was getting there.
Good. You're good. So I've invited Mr. Fugate here.
Hi. Here she is.
Oh,
Aww.
cutie pie.
Is this a he or a she?
This is a girl. The other one's a boy, Rusty and Penny.
Aw.
How old are they?
5-ish.
Wow. I think our cat, the two black ones we have out here, are probably 6 or 7 now. And we have an old gray cat. That old gray cat's got to be 15, 16 years old.
Wow.
It's had a long, it's no tomcat. It's had a long, interesting life.
You are troublesome. I use them in my speeches because I have a picture of each of them, and Rusty is sitting in a little box. He's a little timid, but I always introduce the family, and then I show the cats, and my line is that Rusty is demonstrating proper tornado etiquette by going to a small room toward the center of the house.
Absolutely. James, did you ever see Al Mohler's let's see. Oh God, what was the dog's name? He had a Scotty. I can't think of his name.
Yeah, that I have memories of that in his talks. He'd have pictures.
Yeah, he had the Scotty scale.
Oh, really? I never saw that.
And the F5, the F5 was a dog that had absolutely no hair. It was great. He had him in all kinds of wind situations, except the last one wasn't his real dog. That was always added a little levity to the show.
Yeah, that's funny.
Miss Al.
So everybody's sending me these crummy eclipse pictures from their cell phones.
Yes.
With a lens flare.
Yes. Yes.
Ooh,
look what I got.
I think I have a picture of Saturn in my photo. I have a picture of the moon. It's something. And I'm thinking, oh, brother. Ugh. And you have to be nice.
That's almost a show title.
That's when you say, "No, you idiot," but thanks for taking the photo.
The show title is "I photographed Saturn with my phone."
Hey, my little telephoto lens that I got actually did a pretty decent job, I thought.
Show.
It was.
Well, let's see.
Let's see the picture. Oh, you're going to show the lens.
No, I'm going to show the photo.
Oh, that looks nice.
I believe I did tweet it. I will tweet again for a fresh photo. But
wow,
I didn't see your tweet.
Photo. I'll show you what I got. So the hardest part was I didn't buy an extra set of glasses to like tape or glue or cover the lens, but this was $12 on Amazon.
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
For this little telephoto lens, and it did get some really good pictures. I had two people beside me, over me, holding the glasses steady while I tried to line it up and take the picture. So it was quite an event to take it. But
I got a picture of that.
I know, right? but we did end up managing to get, and I got another one like that. So I was going to put a couple of them in black and white, and
very nice.
It's just nice to say, like, I've actually taken, a decent photo of the eclipse. And next time in 2,421 days, we will be in the 92%. So I can try again.
Yeah, that next one comes right here, right over Waxahachie, south of Dallas.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
So get your glasses now.
Well, I haven't.
Well, I heard somewhere they only last for 3 years.
That's what I heard. I don't know. Does it? I mean,
Is that true? I saw that too. Is that true or not true?
Somebody on the Weather Channel said it, or in that ecosystem, and so I believed it. It was a credible source. I don't know where they got it, but
I've seen multiple credible sources.
I wonder how they expire, though.
Well, I do know, just anecdotally, because this has happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that my prescription sunglasses, the coating has failed, and it is starting to get a little brittle. Yeah.
Well, if our guest doesn't show, it'll just be us. This will be fun. We haven't done a just us show in a long time, and Kevin's here the whole time.
We can show Saturn pictures the whole time.
I have invited him, and I don't have any other contact information or ways of getting in touch with him. I will try it one more time. Let's see. It's clearly the right person. So I've invited him twice. I've invited Kim, and Bill says she might be out, but I've invited her. So we'll give him a couple of minutes, and if he doesn't show, just the four of us, it'll be a homegrown show. These are the best ones. Now, I wish I had a way of determining how many pictures I have received today across every method here, like email and all the social platforms. It's just staggering.
You weren't counting as they came in?
It's called counting. That's
yeah. 1, 2, 3.
That's the way you do it. That's the old-fashioned way.
It's got to be in the thousands. I know I went down to a middle school and watched it with some sixth graders. And so I was kind of off the grid during all that. And I got back, and the Facebook private message count was over 1,200 at that point, just in the 1 hour I'd been out to middle school. And it's going to take a while to. The thing is, you want to get the best pictures to show on the TV tonight, on the late news. So anyway, we'll just have a show with us then. So I don't know what else to do. I don't have any contact information. So it's just going to be the four of us. Nate is somewhere in some. Where did he send an email? Said he's in some cabin with no bandwidth.
There's your show title.
Yeah.
In a cabin
with no bandwidth. All right, let's turn the recorders on here and let's do this thing. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 605 for August 21st. 2017. This was a day that many people anticipated, the day of the solar eclipse. From coast to coast, we'll talk about that, many other things as well, but typically we talk about weather instead of astronomy here. But thanks a lot for taking the time to watch or listen. This is James Spann. Aubrey Urbanowitz is in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Aubrey, How was the eclipse in your neighborhood?
It was very, very, very exciting. I have to say, I don't remember seeing eclipse when I was a kid. I know there was one, but apparently I missed the party. So for this to finally come, it was definitely really interesting, and to try and take some photos. We were at 85% totality. Our temperature only dropped about 5 degrees, but it was just the darkness. I think Emily Sutton said it best on our eclipse group, was that it was like you were putting on a pair of really strong sunglasses as far as the darkness got. So, and I didn't know what to expect, but it was just looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, how would you respond, Aubrey, to the people that say, what a disappointment? I was expecting a big show. It was a dud. I've heard all kind of stuff like that. And how would you respond to that? I thought it was kind of like awesome.
I think it depends on everyone's interest. If you're really not fully into, maybe science or sky watching, or, maybe sitting out and seeing a meteor shower, if that really just doesn't spark your interest, then I can see where people might not just, might think, what's the big deal about this? But I think for many people, and I think many people might even have a new appreciation for some sky watching and sky viewing and astronomy, and kind of soaking in what our skies have for us. And but I think it is some people's different interests, and the moon taking a bite out of the sun just might not be for everybody.
I hear you. Rick Smith is the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma. Rick, how was your eclipse experience today?
It was pretty calm compared to other people's experience. I was home today, so we just kind of enjoyed it from the backyard. I procrastinated and did not get eclipse glasses in time, so we used leaves on the trees and a Cheerios box and all the cruder, plainer methods to watch it. But it was just really awesome to me, even not being able to actually see it, just seeing how dark it got. I mean, we were 83 to 85% obscured here in central Oklahoma, but even that was, I mean, it was very, very noticeable. And I posted on Facebook, this just makes me bound and determined in 7 years, I'm going to be more prepared, because that was, it was really cool just being in this part of it. I would love to be in the 100% obscuration one time.
Texas, Kevin Selly is in his home palatial office this evening. Kevin, how was your experience with the eclipse today?
It was good. I was the same as Rick. I kind of procrastinated on glasses, and this is a tiny little town, so the town ran out of glasses a long time ago and never restocked. So I went back to, I have vague recollections of the 79 one, and so I got a shoebox with a piece of white paper on the inside of one end and a little cutout on the other end and a piece of aluminum foil, and put a little pinprick in the aluminum foil, and it worked great. And then we pulled out a colander. We saw some pictures going by of that, which I thought was cool, because you get a bunch of different holes, you know, from a colander that drains food or whatever. So that was fun. And then observing the sort of dappled crescents from, you know, looking through trees, I thought was fascinating and fun. I had not thought of that. And a friend of mine, Eric Janson, tipped me off to that. So that was fun to watch as well. I think the best one and the most creative that I saw go by was somebody who looked at the eclipse through a saltine cracker, and it worked.
What?
Yes.
What?
It's on my Twitter feed. I retweeted it, and they held up a cracker, and the little holes in the cracker worked, and you can see the little crescents through the saltine cracker. And there's your show title. Yeah, there's your show title, probably. How about through a saltine cracker, Brian?
Doing through a cracker.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty clever.
So, Brian Peters, were you wearing saltine crackers today?
Oh, I didn't have glasses. I didn't go outside. I watched it all on NASA TV.
Well, how was that experience?
That was pretty cool, especially seeing it from outer space. That was even cooler.
Oh, I didn't see any of those. I saw a couple pictures and some video from a plane.
Yeah,
one of the planes, the NOAA Gulfstream. That was cool.
It was pretty obvious to me, working in television, that NASA could have used some help.
Their production values a little.
It was, yeah. I mean, I know live things are hard to do and difficult, but they definitely needed some help.
I think we should announce right now that the April 2024 NASA eclipse feed will be hosted by Colonel Sanders.
Well, what about WeatherBrains just hosting it? We should contact NASA.
How about we go to the Path of Totality and we do a WeatherBrains conference?
It sounds great to me. Let's plan it. April 2024.
By that time, we'll all be broadcasting from the chips embedded in our heads. We won't even need our computers.
And some of us won't be here.
I'm about to say some of us will be at the local cemetery, maybe.
Yeah.
So I got a call.
That's optimistic.
Not that far away. We're not talking 2099.
I'm just saying, Brian and I have been around a long time. So yesterday,
and I'm older than he is. So
about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, from a how can I put this? A man that's kind of in charge of a major college football team, and in this state. And so he initially was just going to go about his normal routine today and do the meeting and the practice and all that. I mean, the season's coming up. I mean, they start playing football here in a couple of weeks. This is a very intense time of the year. But somebody got in this coach's ear. I don't know who did, but he decided that he was going to let his players see this. So he kind of adjusted everything, and then he realized he needed some of these glasses.
Uh-oh.
So I had a little note and just asking for some help, and by the grace of the good Lord, there just happened to be a place. What I did, I threw out a post on social media, did some crowdsourcing. Hey, I know that it's late in the game and you should have these glasses, but by any chance, does anybody have any of these? And somebody sent a note. A store just down the road here from the TV station had a shipment of, like, I think 2,000.
Smith's Variety.
No, it was actually an antique store of all places. And
I heard Smith's Variety.
None of this makes any sense. And so I called down there, and they were willing to reserve a bunch for the team. And so somebody came up and got them. So they were watching the eclipse today. So the only problem is if all the players go blind, I'll get the blame. The whole season's down the tubes because of me. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Hey, Craig, can you hear us? Let's see if our guest is on the line here. I see him. I see a picture, and I don't know if we have any audio or video yet. And I don't think we do at this point. Craig, there is a little gear at the top of the screen with settings. You can choose your mic and your audio source. And if you pick the ones you got, we'll get you on the show here, and we will get right to you in just a second. But no, the eclipse obviously was the big story today. How was the weather forecasting out in your neck of the woods, Rick? What was it pretty much as in terms of the cloud cover? Was that a fairly accurate forecast for the observers?
I think so. In our area, the northwest part of Oklahoma and out into the Texas Panhandle, I think had a little bit more clouds than some were expecting. And certainly when you got up in, I know that a lot of the hand wringing was about Missouri and Kansas, and in parts of Nebraska, a lot of people had committed to go there. But I think it worked out pretty well. It was just really bizarre watching all my storm chaser friends who were now praying for no clouds, when usually storm chasers are looking, if it's blue sky, it's a bad day, but this was totally the opposite. So, but yeah, I think the forecast was pretty good.
I was intrigued by the temperature drop reports from a bunch of different places. I think the most that I saw was 8 degrees. Anybody see more than that?
No. Brian, you you actually had an observation trace. What was your drop?
It was about 7, 8. Yeah.
We did have a 9-degree drop in the southern portion of our area, and their percentage was like an 87.8.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing to me, the cumulus field just died.
Yeah.
It was like, we had your standard early afternoon field of cumulus clouds, which we have almost every day in the summer here. And when the temperature dropped during the eclipse, they just went away. And so, all of a sudden the sky was just clear as could be. So that was pretty fascinating. But the forecast worked out pretty well down here. Again, where Brian and I happen to be, we are just south of the path of totality that ran up through Tennessee. And a lot of people from here went up the road into Tennessee, and they were, to my knowledge, had a great experience. All the photographs I've seen from Tennessee have just been stunning, especially the ones that know how to take the good pictures. Although I will say, to me, the most enjoyable part, it was photographs of people watching the eclipse.
Yes.
Some of the techniques and schemes, especially the welding glass guys. I mean, you look like, I've decided if you put on a welder's mask, a hood, you kind of look like a macho man. That's the way to go next time. But had kids watching it and just some funny poses, and it just, again, it's going to take me a few days to go through all these pictures, but it was a very good experience. And
I think it's going to be. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things Rick wanted me to do, and I'll share some of these stupid questions that came in via social media. I think all of us should share some of the stupid questions. Yeah, that's a great shot. That is a great shot, Aubrey. Yes.
Yeah. One of our viewers
explain for the people that are listening what we got here.
So this is actually about a half mile from my house. This farmer did this last year. He rotates his crops and he plants a huge field of sunflowers, and he also puts out a sign that says, "Pick one for you or for a friend." So this sunflower field is blooming right now. So this is one of our photographers who frequently sends in pictures. Took a picture of this guy using the welding glasses, and you can see him using the camera through the welding glasses to take the eclipse photo in this huge field of sunflowers with the corn behind it. What a great country image.
Yes.
And he's wearing overalls, best of all.
Yeah.
That's really pretty.
That is just fantastic. And Brian, you've got your
there's the temperature trace from my station. And in the Birmingham area, it started around noon, and it's very interesting that it peaked just between about 1:35 and 1:45, and then it started up. So it fell just about as much as it rose. So that was kind of cool.
Awesome. And Aubrey, what you got there? That's your shot, right?
This is my shot. Yeah, this is the 85% eclipsed.
So explain for those that are that didn't hear the pre-show how you got that image?
So I have a Google Pixel, which is rated like the best camera phone ever. And I downloaded a manual camera app. Apparently they make them where you can change like ISO setting. Kevin would know more than I do about shutter speed and all that fancy stuff. So I had someone set those, and I put this little telephoto. I got it off Amazon. It's like a clip-on it's like a little mini clip-on binocular for your cell phone. So I put that on, and it was a struggle between getting the glasses, people to hold the glasses for me, to hold it steady so I could get the steady picture of this photo through the lens and the glasses. So basically when I adjusted the settings, and I'm trying to do this quickly so the movement doesn't change, and I got a steady photo, and the sun looks like it's on fire. It's like a very, very reddish orange with a little glow on the outside, and the moon covering in my area about 85%.
You know, somehow looking
That's
at these, the ones that are sort of Rube Goldberg like that are better than the ones and the people that, you know, set up the big setups with the DSLRs. And, you know, there's a better story with those. So I think that's great.
I mean, two people on either side of me holding
Yes.
the solar eclipse glasses straight while I'm trying to move it along and everything. It was quite the hysteria.
Yeah, that goes back to the cracker thing. I'll remember the cracker much longer than I'll remember somebody shooting with their Nikon.
So, and I don't want to show a lot of pictures because we know that most people listen here.
That one's great.
Yeah, this is just mind-boggling. And if you look really carefully, that's a deck. You can see the boards and the nails. That's somebody's back deck. And there's no trick photography here. This was just a shot taken from a cell phone of these eclipse shadows during the.
But it's through a tree.
And again,
yeah.
Right. This is coming down through a tree, and this was about 1:30 Central Time when the thing was peaking here at about 93, 94%. And to me, I didn't really think about that, you know. And I'm afraid a lot of people missed it because everybody was looking up, and to see that you had to look down. But I mean, it was just remarkable, and people over and over were saying that. For me, this was the best part of the show, was looking down at this. It's just like this ocean of little crescents.
Yeah, what was fun about those too is, you know, we got the pictures, but I shot just a tiny little video clip too, but if there was anything of a breeze, you know, the leaves of course were moving, and so it was wonderful to see all these, you know, dozens or hundreds of crescents that you had just kind of going along with the breeze through the trees. That was really fascinating.
Yeah,
I think what's going to be really interesting is to listen to what Tony has for us, Tony Rice, in the weeks and months ahead, because I was doing, you know, a fair amount of reading on, or at least some, of all the experiments that are being done. You know, the data collection parameters and data points are so much bigger now than they were back in '79, you know, and we're taking pictures from the NOAA Gulf Stream and from the space station, and all this talk about all the research done during totality on the corona and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, that information I'm sure will leak out in the weeks and months ahead, but we'll make sure Tony gives us that, because I guess the stuff that they expect to learn from that is going to be mind-boggling.
Yeah. One more picture, Brian. That's awesome, man. For those watching, this is what you don't wear.
Except saltines work, so maybe Ritz would work.
Yeah. You know, maybe I was on to something.
Or maybe you were on something. That's true.
Well, describe what that is and where it came from.
So, you know, after a while you get all these somewhat insane questions, and I finally just, sometimes you have to laugh, and I just, after answering about 500 questions about glasses, I just decided to make up my own. So initially I got a couple of Ritz crackers, and I was gonna kind of get them on my glasses, but those things didn't stick. Tape didn't work, nothing worked. So I wound up getting peanut butter crackers, and
the story behind the picture is even worse.
Yeah, so my wife had some kind of gooey stuff that somehow worked, so we got the peanut butter crackers stuck on my glasses, and I just threw out. This is not the type of eyewear that's considered safe for viewing the eclipse.
But that is your show title: peanut butter crackers stuck on my glasses.
You got that right. So there, we can get Craig on here. Craig, we're seeing your picture, a still picture. We don't have any video, but that's okay. Let's see if we can get your audio. See if you can talk with us. We are listening intently, and you're not muted. And I wish I knew what to tell you. Again, there's a little gear up there that says settings, and you can choose your video and your audio source. And beyond that, I don't know what to tell you. For those that don't know, Craig Fugate is the former FEMA director under the Obama administration. Prior to that, he was headed up the Florida Emergency Management Division, and he oversaw the Big Four of '04. He was there during that tremendous hurricane year, and I sure hope we can get him on, because I have many questions and thoughts, and we'd love to hear from him. So, Craig, we're still not seeing you or hearing you, and all we have to do is just hear you to make this work. And beyond that, I don't know what else to tell you to try. Again, under settings, you should see the audio source of choice that will work, and we'll see if we can get him on here in just a little bit. But what I want to do, since I've got Kevin here, I want to pick a couple of topics. One is going to be social media.
Okay.
And one's going to be the future of our enterprise. And Rick's on here, and Aubrey and Brian. And when we've got a situation like this, and we got some time to talk, I think this stuff is important. I want to save the social media for the back end and just talk about where is this going, because, you know, almost every Friday, Craig, you did something. Talk to us.
Well, can you hear me now?
Hey.
Yes, we have a winner. Bingo. We don't see
touch
you.
anything.
Yeah, we don't see you, but we can hear you, and that will be very adequate. So,
Okay.
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, thanks for being patient with us. Again, Craig was the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency from 2009 to 2017 with the Obama administration, and prior to that, he was with the EMA down in Florida. And Craig, let's kind of go back to your younger days when you were coming up through high school and college. Was this your career path of choice as a young person, or did you just kind of evolve into this? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I never took any formal career path. I kind of bounced around. I actually started out when I got out of high school, went to Santa Fe Community College. I got my paramedic certificate, and I was doing fire rescue, and made lieutenant, and was thought I was going to be in the fire service for my career. And I got a chance to work on the county's emergency management plan, and that was February 1987, and I never went back on the road after that. I ended up doing emergency management at the county level for 10 years. I got called up to the state, served as bureau chief for preparedness and response for a lot of events. 1998 in particular, when we had a very strong El Nino, we had a tornado outbreak in Central Florida with 42 lives lost. And you just don't think of Florida as a tornado-prone state. Also, the year we had major wildfires and a hurricane all in one season. And then in 2001, after 9/11 happened, Governor Bush asked me to serve him as his state emergency management director, and that led to the 4 hurricanes in '04. A couple more events, and worked for Governor Chris a little bit, and then the Obama administration called me up to FEMA. So I really didn't have a career path. It just kind of like I kept answering my phone when people called, and they were calling to see would I be interested in doing something else.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I don't think I've ever applied for a job. It just I answer the phone, and it just kind of happens. So I'm in there with you. But let's go back to your days back in Florida, the 1998 outbreak. Talk a little bit about that. The night of the tornadoes in Florida. That was a long, harsh night.
Yeah, we were seeing. Back in the fall, there was a lot of discussion about that El Nino that was supposed to primarily be a West Coast issue. And there was a lot of talk about how strong the El Nino was forecasted and what the impacts were going to be. And not a whole lot of work had been done on the East Coast. But Melbourne National Weather Service, Bart Hagemeyer and his team had actually done some research and found that during strong El Ninos, there's a direct correlation to deadly tornado outbreaks in Florida, and they tend to occur at night, not during the daytime. So even though this tornado outbreak was pretty significant, we actually were planning for events like that. And on that particular day, we had an extremely powerful front come through with low pressure in the Gulf of Mexico. It was almost a perfect dynamics for a coastal storm. And I think people were really focused on the west coast of Florida. And when that didn't materialize, I think people thought it was over. But sure enough, that squall line intensified. And as it moved through central Florida, we were seeing long track tornadoes, F2s and greater, hit across the state. And by morning, we had 42 fatalities and hundreds of people that had lost everything in their homes. So during strong El Ninos for Florida, particularly across the southeast, that was one of the things we were starting to see was the correlation between climate patterns and direct impacts at the local level. And during these strong El Ninos across the southeast, it's not uncommon to see a lot of tornado activity well before the typical tornado season starts.
Craig,
So
what are
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, since we're kind of on this Florida, what are the communication paths before and during the weather communication paths before and during an event to the FEMA folks?
Well, Florida's kind of interesting because, they were putting in the NEXRAD radars based upon coverage, and part of it was the marine forecast coverage. So Florida ended up with 6 offices and 7 that actually issue warnings for the state. So we have a pretty good relationship between the counties and the National Weather Service offices and the State Emergency Operations Center. We have them all on a statewide communication networks. And so when we saw major weather events, we would usually have conference calls with the Weather Service offices and the county emergency management agencies before we'd actually get to a watch phase of the event. And then we work very closely with the Florida Association of Broadcasters. We were one of the first states to get our emergency alert system up and running, tie-in so that both the National Weather Service and local emergency managers could access and activate the system. And so that gave us a pretty good system on that side. The problem is when you have tornadoes occurring in the middle of the night, people aren't watching television or radio. This is well before we saw a lot of social media. And so the other part was the NOAA weather radios. And we weren't as successful getting that out to the public, but we did a much better job using some grant funding from FEMA to get them into all the public schools. So that was 1998. Today, you see much more active use of social media during heightened events. You see a lot more effort working with local broadcasters now who are doing both, the traditional broadcast and social media to complement that. And now we have the wireless emergency alert on cell phones. So even if you are sound asleep, we can, crank up the cell phones when there's warnings issued by the Weather Service.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of WEA questions because if anybody knows how the sausage is made, I bet you Craig knows. But let's stick with the Florida outbreak for just a minute. You had an EF4 tornado. It was initially rated, let's see, an EF4. I think they maybe revised it down to an EF3. And as I look at this, Rick Smith, you correct me if I'm wrong, or Craig, but this was the one that went from Campbell to Kissimmee, and it killed 25 people. And it looks like this is about midnight, 1 a.m., something like that. $55 million in damage. You say weather radio use in homes was not especially high in '98. What was the main? How did people get those warnings for the ones that did back in '98? Was it radio, TV, or what?
It was radio and TV, and that was part of the challenge when people were, if they were watching the evening news, they may have gotten a little bite about more severe weather potential, but many of these cells didn't develop until after the evening news was over. So unless you were really paying attention, there just wasn't anything that was going to alert you. Florida does not have outdoor warning systems like you have out in some of the western, Midwestern states. So pretty much that made us extremely vulnerable to these tornadoes. And when you look in Florida's history, our tornadoes, the strong, powerful ones, are at night. We don't really see a high percentage during the day, and the fatalities tend to be much higher because people are home. We have a large number of manufactured housing, and particularly the older stock does not do well at all, even in F0s and F1s. but not too many will, even in today's construction, do well when you're talking about F3. So combination of timing of tornadoes, the housing stock that made people more vulnerable, and the lack of any effective outdoor warning systems contributed to the high loss of life.
How was the tornado warning? How were the tornado warnings issued by the Weather Service? Were they pretty timely that night?
Yeah, they were getting, and again, this was still fairly early in a lot of the decision support tools that were being rolled out to complement NexRad. But in general, I think we were looking at probably some of our longest lead times of 10 to 15 minutes, which is an enormous amount of time in Florida. Generally, our tornadoes actually have a NexRad sweep cycle unless it's on storm mode. And so it's not uncommon that, during some summer thunderstorms to get an F0 hit and before the Weather Service ever saw it on radar or ever got a warning out. But these were definitely showing up in the hook echoes. It was definitely something that they were getting warnings out. So it showed that in these stronger tornadoes were in the more defined threat. The warning system, the lead times were there. It was just the lack of how do you communicate to people at night and when you don't have outdoor warning systems. And the solution that a lot of people say, well, you need to put in sirens. And the problem is that was moving in a direction that just wasn't going to be sustainable. So we started pushing harder on NOAA weather radio. And now that we now have the wireless emergency alerts with the cell phones, start moving into that direction, whereas that continues to be refined. And, with the FCC going through another revision updates on that, the idea is, most people have a cell phone with them or somebody in the proximity has one. If you can get a warning to that cell phone, you pretty much can get coverage across the area of impact.
Well, let's just talk about WEA. Let's again, if Bill Murray was here, he does these interviews in a great fashion. I'm a weather guy. I'm not an interview guy. But let's talk about WEA for just a second. We're going to go back and talk about the 2004 hurricane season. I think for those of us in operational meteorology, and again, Rick Smith is at the Weather Service in Norman. He's with the feds. We're not. We're private sector. And we talked about it some on the show here, but we're not really aware of how that whole process works, the infrastructure. And so, Craig, talk about WEA, if you can. Is it consistent from state to state in terms of what people receive? In terms of where we are down here in the Deep South, as best I can tell, I get three things via WEA. I get tornado warnings, flash flood warnings, and amber alerts. Does it work that way around the nation? Is it consistent from state to state?
Yeah, what we did was, in order to basically take the existing systems, we run all of this through the what we call IPAWS, the Integrated Public Warning and Alert System, so that when the National Weather Service offices are issuing their warning products, we're actually taking that into the previously what was the emergency alert system, but now includes WEA and other channels. And we strip the headers off and we look for those things that fall in the category of life threatening. So that's why you generally see the flash flood warnings, but not a flood. Tornado warnings, but you don't get other things. And so the focus there was, if you're settings on your phone, you can select and turn off the amber alerts, things like that, which has shown to be useful as a mass notification tool, but you can opt out of that. You can get light threatening weather warnings, and that's why you tend to see the tornado and the flash flood warnings. But essentially, we set a pretty high bar there that if you're going to send this out over to cell systems, we wanted to carry the highest value. So it tends to be focused on life threatening weather. And then the presidential notifications, which have never been done, but you can't opt out of that. And so the idea is when the Weather Service issues a tornado warning, the advantage that WEA has over a lot of other systems is it geocodes which cell towers have to be activated. So as we move away from a county-based warnings and we start moving to more geocoded, particularly as the Weather Service starts issuing warnings based upon polygons, WEA will only then alert the cell towers that would be transmitting in that particular counties in Arizona that are huge. So you could have a tornado in one part of the county and never see rain in the other. We can have that in Florida in Brevard County. So that's that part of it. The limitation has been the initial reluctance and compromise working with the cell companies was it was only 120 characters. I think everybody realizes that 120 characters does not really communicate much more than you got to go get some more information. But the idea that it can be geocoded by cell towers, and that it can now, as the FCC is looking at, not only just the text part of that, but how do you bring in other things? The ideal thing will be is that your phone knows where it's at, it's self-aware, and that when the Weather Service issues the warning, it's not just give you a text message, but show you proximity based upon direction and path of the event and your location. So as the FCC is going through rulemaking on WEA, they're taking those incremental steps to really move to where we wanted to, and that is location-based warnings that the Weather Service puts in the polygon of the area of risk, and it gives you the proximity and direction and how relevant that warning is for you.
So it's evaluating radar data then as well?
No, it doesn't. The Weather Service issues the product. So until the Weather Service actually sends out that warning, WEA doesn't do any analysis. All WEA does is transmit it.
But I'm sorry, I thought you said that going forward, that what you're evolving toward is to try and give some sort of situational awareness. Is that future product including radar, looking at radar?
Not necessarily. What it would do is, because this would only be for warning products, is when the Weather Service moves towards putting out a polygon as the warning versus just doing the county area, it would then have that polygon and whatever the data is coming from the Weather Service, and then taking that and the proximity to the phone and showing you the relationship between where you're at and where that polygon is at.
So you're saying it's looking at it's finding cell towers in the, for lack of a better way to say it, in the eastern edge of a polygon on an eastward moving storm.
Do is when the polygon is issued, then it will go back, and through the cell companies, as they get the geocode fence for the WEA alert, they will specifically then dictate which one of their cell towers broadcast, because this is not SMS and this is not cellular communication. This is the radio function. It's a broadcast. So for the cell companies, they want to minimize the number of cell towers that they put into broadcast mode to send out this signal. And it eliminates overwarning. One of our challenges, we had a tsunami LA County. Well, it was going all the way up into the hills, far beyond the areas that are even, would even see tsunami impacts. And so this has been one of the goals as the Weather Service moves to more geocoded and more specific polygon shapes, that we don't have to warn an entire community or entire county. I lived in DC. We got flash flood warnings routinely, but it was usually for, very limited areas. But you got the entire area got the flash flood warning.
I think one of my questions involves big events like derechos. These straight line wind events that are fairly large scale. They can bring winds in excess of 100 miles an hour, producing very extreme damage. Is there a plan to phase in maybe an option where a severe thunderstorm warning could be sent out via WEA if it's really a critical situation like that?
Yeah, this is part of the learning process. When the initial steps were taken, there was a lot of concern that we would be overly we'd activate WEA too many times and we desensitize people to it, particularly the function that unless you opt out, it's going to wake you up at night. And so the concern was on severe thunderstorm warnings. That's a fairly low bar in some parts of the country. We'd see these periodically, and it would actually desensitize people to them. So that's one of the things as we continue to work with the Weather Service is, the great debate about, is the threshold for severe warning for a thunderstorm really conveying a life-threatening risk, or is it set too low? Are we using the right terminology of watch and warning to communicate risk to people? And once we see, I think, better ways of communicating risk, and we come back and recategorize that, I would expect that to be the case. Of course, I've seen some enterprising folks go ahead and put a tornado header in there just to know they can get something out quicker than the traditional other products that may not trigger a WEA alert.
Yeah, that was my question to Rick Smith. Rick, have you guys ever kind of cheated? If you've got like a really, really an emergency involving a severe storm and you'd like to push it out via WEA, that's the only way to do it. It's just use tornado warning header, right?
Yeah, that's right. We have never intentionally done that. I know some offices probably have. I know there are a whole bunch of changes in the works. The FCC has approved some changes like increasing the character limit and letting you put URLs and things like that, and phone numbers in the WIA messages. So that's going to be changing over time. But another thing the Weather Service is looking at is a way to key in on the higher end severe thunderstorm warnings. All the severe thunderstorm warnings now have tags at the bottom that give wind speed and hail size. So maybe there'll be some threshold there where we can, say it's hurricane force winds or whatever the case may be, then we could activate just for the higher end severe thunderstorms. You start activating it for all of them, then forget about it. People they'll be turned off.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. And the next question is, what about our friends on the coast? Are hurricane warnings part of WIA?
Yeah, the interesting thing was New York City was one of the first areas that we were piloting WIA. So when Superstorm Sandy came in, they were getting the coastal flood, flash flood, high winds, and everything else, and they were getting multiple WIA warnings because it wasn't a hurricane. There wasn't a hurricane warning issued. And some of the social media that we were seeing was people for the first time were getting WIA alerts, and they said, this must be serious. My phone's going off 3 times. It didn't do that for Irene. Well, part of it was the pilot hadn't started yet. So as you go through the things that we can activate it for, it's a limited set, but it's designed, as Rick says, we keep getting a better track record with the FCC and the broadcasters. We're now expanding that product out. The next steps will be how do we move it into a more of an impact warning versus just going with watch warning type characterizations of risk. And I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about severe thunderstorms is moving away from just the pure definition of you hit the thresholds for a severe thunderstorm to going what are the impacts and then figuring out how to use those impacts to gauge when you would activate WIA versus you wouldn't. And that's always, people want to go err with caution and always warn. But we also know, as Rick said, there's another part of this is that's the people that then start turning this thing off and start ignoring warnings. How do we move from those that are communicating a certain degree of risk to now it's moved to a life-threatening risk and we need you to take immediate action? And that's really been the goal of WIA, is to try to move it from not everything, but those that are mainly the highest risk of a life threat.
Awesome.
And James, one of the other things that's coming up new, the Weather Service is doing, is being able to activate it for a tornado emergency. So, obviously we will activate for a tornado warning, but if we issue a tornado warning and then 5 minutes later decide we need to do a tornado emergency, and we do that using a severe weather statement, well, today that will not activate the wireless emergency alert, but in the near future, that tornado warning, that tornado emergency language would trigger an additional WIA alert. So that's another thing that's coming. And we've had an informal agreement with the state emergency management here in Oklahoma if we ever got into that situation where they could activate the WIA with that information. But now, I don't know when it's going to turn on to do this, but tornado emergencies will also be a special alert that you'll get through WIA.
And I would assume somewhere in the chain, there's got to be an option for human interaction where some wizard somewhere can pull a lever and activate WIA manually, I assume. Maybe in a EMA office?
Yeah, those are your civil emergency messages. So as Rick pointed out, the state would have that option if they need to get a tornado emergency out. The state could actually issue that under their civil emergency messaging capabilities. So as both the EAS header codes have expanded, one of the things that FEMA does, working with the FCC and all of the various groups, including a big part of this is the cell companies themselves, is adding to and refining what WIA is used for and increasing its utilization across severe weather. And I think as the cell companies have gotten more used to this, their big concerns was the adverse publicity and things they would get for either overwarning or missed warnings. And if you remember a couple of years ago when we first started seeing this widely used for Amber Alerts, there was a big issue in California because they activated so many counties because they had an abduction that was moving across the state and actually ended up in the Northwest outside of the state. And the initial coverage was pretty negative about WEA until the girl was recovered. And they were able to demonstrate that she wasn't a significant risk, that WEA helped get information out, and she got rescued. And I think people kind of backed off of it. But there was quite a bit of controversy in the initial days when that WEA alert using WEA crossed much of California.
Awesome.
Craig, I wonder if
let's shift.
I was going to shift.
Kev.
I was going to shift a little too. I'm interested in the FEMA side because we'd mentioned tropical systems and hurricanes. I would love to hear your perspective, Craig, on Katrina. FEMA had a lot of press, both negative and positive, during that time, and I'd be interested to hear your comments about that. And then, if this makes sense as a question, how long the ripple effect from that lasted, in the halls of FEMA.
Well, I was in Florida, so I was, we were sending mutual aid to Mississippi primarily. We did about, I think the total bill was over a couple $100 million in mutual aid we sent. So we were pretty wrapped up doing that. And there was a lot of things that went wrong in Katrina, and it kind of got laid at the feet of a couple of people, the mayor, the governor, and the FEMA director. And I kind of stepped back and said, folks, there's no way 3 people could have made this mess. And I think it was one of the things that I had been watching, and today I continue to tell people that if you really want to get to the root issue of what happened in Katrina, it was we planned for what we were capable of, and we just hope it was never any worse. And if it was, our systems would scale up. And I think Katrina demonstrated that systems don't scale up. If you aren't preparing for how bad it can be, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail your citizens at the greatest time of need. So, Congress and the fact that, in much of the country, FEMA did not have the confidence of people. When I got there, it was the dominant thing we were dealing with. We were still dealing with tremendous numbers of people. Over 5,000 families are still in travel trailers. We had all kinds of reports that Congress wanted that hadn't even been started, as well as trying to reorient the implementation of the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, which Dave Paulison, my predecessor, had been working on, and we picked that up. But the thing is not as bad as it can be. And unlike earthquakes, hurricanes come with warnings. So if you think Katrina was as bad as it gets, I got bad news for you. Not a mindset. We have to be looking at bigger events. So the echo of Katrina was there when I got there. When I walked out the door, I think we had moved past that. But it is, again, for a lot of people, Katrina was for FEMA what Hurricane Andrew was for the state of Florida. It was, we got to quit, talking about doing stuff and actually be able to execute.
Do you think the public perception then today, because the internet wasn't what it was back in those days, it is much more, to a point, robust now. Everybody has cell phones now. Do people have a false sense of security, do you think, thinking that, okay, we have these communication paths and the government or FEMA or whoever in a real bad situation will be able to take care of us, and that they think that maybe they don't have to prepare as much? Does that make sense as a question?
No, that's not what I was telling him. I was telling him the first responder is going to be you and your neighbor. And the worse it is, the more likely that's the only thing you're going to see.
Right.
I think one of the things that I found was make sure that we were communicating what was going to be, not what people wanted to hear. And I think it's too easy for government to say, it's really bad and the chips are down, we're going to be there to take care of you. And I think we had to be honest with people and say, look, the bigger the disaster, the harder it's going to be to get to everybody. That's why we started looking at the public a little bit differently and trying to change terminology, quit calling them victims and calling them survivors, and looking at them as a resource. Which is hard for government, because government, generally, when you think about how we talk about the public and how we try to deal with the public during disasters, we don't really see them as a resource. We tend to see them as a liability. But my point was, the bigger the disaster, you start running out of stuff faster. The only thing left that's going to be in the immediate area is people helping each other. And so we had to move, this idea of our preparedness message from just don't get ready and take care of yourself and your family, but do something, else after it happens. You're okay. Check on your neighbors. And have you guys noticed on heat waves, our fatalities have been going down from where it was in the 90s? Part of that is better planning at the local level, but I think part of it is a consistent messaging from the Weather Service to American Red Cross, FEMA, state and local emergency managers that during heat waves, take care of yourself. Here's your warning signs. Drink plenty of water. Stay out of the heat. But do something else. Check on shut-ins, particularly the elderly. And I think sometimes if we engage the public, we can actually reduce the losses. And in many cases, it's just messaging. I think people are, a lot of people will do stuff, but they, basically got to enable them. And so I think during heat waves, we've had a lot of success in messaging. Check on your neighbors, check on the elderly. And that has, if you look across the heat waves, our fatalities have been much better managed than they were back in the 90s.
That's a great message to look to your neighbors, count on your neighbors, help your neighbors, and credit to you for making that shift. I really like that. If I can, I'm going to shift to, pardon me, social media a little bit. I'm the resident social media skeptic on this panel, and I get the information sharing, and it almost speaks to what you were talking about, sense of community and helping friends and things like that. One of my biggest problems with social media, though, is the sharing of time-sensitive information on two primary platforms that are time shifting that information. And Twitter is coming more toward that, and Facebook has done it for a long, long time. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, you communicate people the way they receive it. So one message, many platforms. So I'm pretty agnostic. As I remind people, Twitter won't stop bleeding, but it may be the way to call for help. And as you look at how people get information, Twitter is just one of many different things that people do. And particularly before an event, if you can build that you're a trusted source, you can get information out. You can do something you can't do with just about any other form of communication. You can listen. And I found that too often what most people in emergency management have done is they've looked at social media as just another form of doing press releases. But as we were working at FEMA, I said, we need to listen because people are going to tell us a lot of what's going on, and it will also tell us how they're receiving our messages. I remember we were dealing with a hurricane off of the Outer Banks. So the Hurricane Center called, I think it was Rick Knapp, was kind of concerned that they weren't seeming to take the storm very seriously, that a lot of local residents weren't evacuating. And so I went to the hashtag OBX, and it actually, their hashtagging, what they were saying was, they need to get all the tourists out. They didn't know what to do. We need to get, ready for the storm. Looks like we're going to lose power and lose the roads. But I went back to Rick and I said, look, they may not like what you may not think, they think they should be evacuating, and they're not, but they understand the storm and they're taking actions that they think were appropriate. So if the concern here is they don't understand there's a storm threatening, that's not the issue. They may be looking at these storm surges and going, that's not that bad for us. We just need to get the tourist out. And sometimes those local calls, again, you want an optimum response, but I was able to reassure the Hurricane Center. I said, based upon the social media, they're taking the storm serious. They're shutting down and getting the tourist out. And at the height of their tourist system, that is a major undertaking for them.
Does it concern you? One of my other positions is that we're training people to go to Facebook and Twitter for information, and that information will come to them in a fairly spotty and unreliable nature, as opposed to going to a FEMA website or a National Hurricane Center website or a James Spann website that is consistently, reliably updating you on that information, as opposed to training them to use the social media?
Oh, we're feeding the social media on our webpage anyway. I mean, I don't worry about it too much. I figure people will, whatever they're going to use. I don't think we're training them so much as we're communicate. And again, that's why I think it's one message across multiple formats. So if you got WEA, you got the emergency alert system, you got No Weather Radio, you got Twitter, you got Facebook, you got your Facebook Live and all the other gadgets out there, and you're keeping your websites updated, then I think you're covering a lot of area. But as far as Twitter and those kind of products go, there was a big concern with the Weather Service when Twitter and other things came out, is how do you communicate? And I said, it's real easy. Take your statement and your link and just send it out. Social media tends to work best in the long duration events like the hurricanes, but even in severe weather activities, we're seeing a lot of people get a warning and then they're sending it out to their friends and families with tweets and Facebook updates and, text messaging and a variety of other things. So the latent delays, yeah, that's always going to be a concern, but it's how people are getting information. And things like hurricanes, that's usually less of an issue. But I don't think we're training them. I think that's what they're using. We just have to continue that dialogue and do something that we don't generally do, and that is when we're communicating is listen and get feedback from the public, because it's one of the few tools we have in an emergency to have two-way communication short of face-to-face.
Has FEMA ever had any direct consultations, communications, planning with Facebook or Twitter?
Yeah, we met with them early on. One of the things that came out of that was
this is just a one-time meeting some years ago, or what?
Yeah, no, basically when I got to FEMA about 2009, 2010, that was the whole thing about getting the authenticated accounts out, so people could know who, if it was a public official or a government entity, that it was actually authenticated. We talked with Facebook about some of the things where people just being able to let people know they were okay. Did the same thing with Google. And so out of that, one of the things that you're seeing Facebook doing now is when you got these particularly big events, they're actually putting that into their headers going into Facebook. And again, both them, Google and Microsoft, are working, how do they take a lot of their various tools they develop and use that to get information out to folks. But they don't want to be the source. They just want to be the communications.
Let's talk about the hurricane season of 04 and 04. What was it like being the FEMA, or not the FEMA, but the EMA director in the state of Florida for that unbelievable year?
Well, when you get hit with a big hurricane, you figure that's it. You've had your big hurricane. So people forget we actually had Tropical Storm Bonnie hit on the 12th. And then Charlie made landfall on the 13th of August. And so we thought, well, that was the big storm. You get one big hurricane, and Charlie was intense. It was like a big tornado, but it was rather a defined track. It was one of the few times I've ever been in a helicopter and I could actually follow the outline of the storm. And so that was, we thought we were done. Then 22 days later, we had Francis come, slogging across the state. And then 11 days later, we had Ivan come up. Started to look like it was going to be another Charlie track, and then it went on out to the Panhandle and ended up splitting between Alabama and Florida and doing tremendous damage, and we lost the I-10 bridge. So you figure 3 hurricanes, we'd never seen that in Florida's history. And then when Gene came back around after Ivan hit, at the end of that, it was there was a lot of video being shot, and we actually worked with the folks at the Florida Association of Broadcasters and putting together a DVD of that season, and the first briefings and stuff in the EOC when we were getting ready for Charlie look a whole lot different than the briefings when we were getting ready for Gene. There was a bunch of tired people when that storm came around.
Yeah, I was going to say that had to drain your resources, and the people just had to be physically and emotionally exhausted, weren't they, by the end of this thing?
Yeah, but we had a mission, and that's the media kept asking us when we're gonna break, and I'm like, what do you mean when we're gonna break? That's not an option. It was a good team, both state agencies, local governments, private sector, the NGOs. Probably the group that we didn't really incorporate in the 04 hurricane season, but we learned that the next year was the businesses and private sector. We had the utilities in there, but I think it was really it wasn't just something that happened. That was something we'd been building under leadership of Governor Bush. I mean, not many governors, when they do their hurricane exercises, actually show up and participate for much longer than a photo op. And we would do exercises where Governor Bush would have his chief of staff take a roll of agency heads that had missed the exercise for a variety of reasons, and that asked them to respond to him why. And I got a couple of angry agency heads calling me wanting to know why I didn't tell them the governor's going to be there. And I said, why do you think we call it the governor's hurricane exercise? But, there's only so much you can do.
What did you learn from that year in terms of hurricane preps, hurricane warnings, human behavior, social science? What was the big takeaway from all that?
Well, the big takeaway is if the Waffle House is open, it ain't that bad. Keep going. We had the thing that I'd started moving away from was we thought the lesson we learned in Hurricane Andrew was we need to do a better job post-storm assessments, because if you remember right after Andrew, the initial reports out of the Dade County EOC up by the airport was, it looks like they dodged a bullet. It was bad, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. What they didn't know was south of there, about 122nd Street South, was just total devastation. But they weren't getting 911 calls, so they didn't know how bad it was. And so we thought the thing you had to do after hurricanes was do all this assessments, and you had to wait for formal requests to come up before you could respond. Well, by the time you do all that, you're about before you get help. And I decided that was kind of not working. So if we got a hurricane making landfall, let's respond like it's a bad hurricane. And so we weren't waiting for anybody to ask for help. We're on conference calls with counties all the way through and during the storm. But we just told everybody, as soon as we get down below tropical force winds, we're rolling. We're not waiting for the skies to clear, the sun to come up, or it stop raining. And we're going to drive to where we think the area of greatest impacts are, while the locals begin their initial response and can tell us where they think it is. And so that's really how the Waffle House came into being. Was we started going, and somebody said, well, how do we know we're there yet? And we had observed that Waffle Houses very rarely ever close. And those that do get closed by a storm are usually the first things open. So we said, well, let's use the scale we've been using for other things. And so if you get there and the Waffle House is open, got a normal, full menu, that's green, keep going. If you get there and they're open, but they got a limited menu, you probably got a lot of mass care, power outages, things like that, because the freezer's out. And if you get there and the Waffle House is closed, that's pretty damn bad. That's red. Go to work.
That's awesome. So
I love it.
Let me ask you this. Let's say if you could get some advice to Brock Long, the current FEMA director, what advice would you give him?
I don't have to give Brock any advice. He's been doing this about as long as I have. During the 04 hurricanes, he was actually the FEMA Region 4 Hurricane Program Manager.
Yeah.
Did Alabama. He's been in the private sector. The thing that I told the folks on the way out is don't be reasonable. Reasonable people usually fail in big disasters. There's a tendency that if you're not pushing yourself and your team hard, is you tend to settle into the more reoccurring events that you deal with every day, and you start finding yourself losing your edge. And I said, you don't want to go back to the point where all you're really able to do is to manage the day-to-day events and not be able to handle the big events, because scaling up is just not going to work. You either prepare for that from everything from how you exercise, how you plan. So my advice to the team going outdoors, just don't be reasonable people, because reasonable people usually fail in disaster response.
And I think a lot of people in my business don't really appreciate the EMA. We have these integrated warning team meetings. We have the National Weather Service, we have the broadcasters, and we have the EMA. And that's the team that should make the watch warning process work. But your responsibility goes way beyond weather. I mean, you might deal with an earthquake on the New Madrid Fault. You might deal with a nuclear strike from this, Yoho in North Korea. It's a hard job. I mean, this is something that goes way beyond weather.
Yeah, I think we get a lot of people think the only thing that emergency management does is natural hazards and weather. It's one of the things we do the most frequently, but it's not our biggest threat in many cases. And we like to tell people it's all hazards. It doesn't mean all hazards are the same, but generally the mayor is the mayor no matter what the disaster is. And the other thing we try to get people to quit calling them is natural disasters, because they're natural hazards. They become disasters by where and how we built in that environment for that risk. And those communities do a better job with building codes and land use, tend to have less impacts from similar storms that impact areas that don't do those kind of things. So we really, part of this was basic elements of government. What I like to tell people is emergency management, probably the elevator speech is when you try to tell people what we are, is most people talk process. I said, here's what we do. We come in when the org chart of day-to-day government can't manage the event. You dial 911, fire truck show up, putting out your house fire. That's an emergency because that's how the system is built. Emergency management really kicks in when the event's so big or there are so many issues that the normal organizations of even your emergency services can no longer continue to function the way they are and be successful. And so essentially what we do is we're the ones when the org chart won't work, we're the ones that come in and reassemble it and put the team together and start leveraging our surrounding neighbors, our state partners, and the states to that mutual aid through the Emergency Management Systems Compact, and ultimately through FEMA, coordinating the federal agencies on behalf of the president supporting the governor.
Well, you've given us an hour of your time, Craig. You're very kind to do that. One more question before we let you go. Looking ahead, what's the biggest improvement area that you see in terms of FEMA on the federal level and the state level, the local level? What do you need work on? Because we talk about that in weather all the time. What's the one spot you worry about?
Quit building crap in the wrong places the wrong way.
Show title.
Amen.
We
have a show title now.
I just need to be blunt about this. Too often we know how to build better and more resilient in a lot of threat areas, yet we fight a constant challenge of those folks that want to make the argument that we got to keep homes affordable versus total cost of home ownership is how it's going to be insurable, how other events, and more importantly, is that home survivable? And so I try to get people to say, yes, building codes can add cost to home construction. Not as much as people will sometimes tell you in a hearing when there's discussions about it, but it will raise it. But the big difference is, what is the total cost of that home and how resilient and safe is your home during weather hazards? And, it's very rare that we can go into an area, and I hear this a lot. People say, I've lived here all my life and I never knew it could be so bad. Is we've got a pretty good idea about, particularly on flooding and flood risk, things like that, storm surge in coastal areas, where those are the most vulnerable areas. And a lot of it has to do with where and how we build. And I'm not saying you don't build. I'm not a person that says we can't build in hazard areas. But I think we need to really focus on quit growing our risk to where it is no longer sustainable. Because the tendency is to think we're going to have to just build bigger and bigger responses. And the answer is that's just not even fiscally possible. We need to, attack this from both ends, making sure we have the capability to respond to disasters, but also make sure that we're not growing our risk by continuing to build homes in places that have either high vulnerabilities that we're not adjusting to, or in some cases rebuilding right after disasters pretty much the same way in the same place won't happen anytime in the near future.
Awesome. I totally agree. It's a big issue down here. Well, listen, Craig, thanks so much for coming on the show this week. We really appreciate you giving us the time, and thanks for the job that you've done and the job that you will do and your heart for people and everything you do. So thanks a lot for coming on the show this week.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. We're going to take a quick break here. We're going to do Professor Peters. We've got Tony Rice. We'll come back with Weather Roundup. Email bag from Aubrey, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
The reasons behind the changing of leaf color in the autumn have been studied for years, and despite all the work to understand the changes that happen to trees and shrubs in the autumn, we don't know all the details, but we know enough to explain some of the basics behind nature's multicolored autumn farewell. There are three primary factors that influence autumn leaf color. These are leaf pigments, length of night, and weather. The timing of color change and leaf fall are primarily regulated by the calendar, that is, the increasing length of night as we move through late summer and into autumn. None of the other environmental influences, including temperature, rainfall, food supply, and so on, are as unvarying as the steadily increasing length of night during autumn. As days grow shorter and nights grow longer and cooler, biochemical processes in the leaf begin to paint the landscape with nature's autumn palette. The amount and brilliance of the colors that develop in any particular autumn season are related to weather conditions that occur before and during the time that the chlorophyll in the leaves is dwindling. Temperature and moisture are the main influences. A succession of warm, sunny days and cool, crisp, but not freezing nights seems to bring about the most spectacular color displays. During these days, lots of sugars are produced in the leaf, but the cool nights and the gradual closing of veins going into the leaf prevent these sugars from moving out. The presence of lots of sugar and lots of light spur production of the brilliant anthocyanin pigments, which tint reds, purples, and crimson. Because carotenoids are always present in leaves, the yellow and gold colors remain fairly constant from year to year. The amount of moisture in the soil also affects autumn colors. Like the weather, soil moisture varies greatly from year to year. The countless combinations of these two highly variable factors are sure that no two autumns can be exactly the same. A late spring or a severe summer drought can delay the onset of fall color by a few weeks. Warm periods during the fall will also lower the intensity of autumn colors. A warm, wet spring, favorable summer weather, and warm, sunny fall days with cool nights should produce the most brilliant autumn colors. Special thanks to the U.S. Forest Service, part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, for their help in researching this topic. If you have a question about the weather, drop an email to question@weatherbrains.com.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
Now that the eclipse of 2017 is in the history books, the most frequent question heard at most eclipse viewing sites, at least those in totality, was, when's the next one? The next eclipse event will be January 31st, 2018, a total lunar eclipse. Now, this eclipse begins about 3 hours before sunrise on the west coast, only about 30 minutes before sunrise on the east coast. So Pacific and Mountain time zones will see all of the total eclipse, while the show will be interrupted by moonset in the Central and Eastern time zones. Keep those solar eclipse glasses in a safe place, though. You're going to need them on November 11th, 2019, for the transit of Mercury. Tiny little Mercury will be visible as it passes in front of the sun over a 4-hour period. The next solar eclipse visible from North America is in October of 2023, and that will be a partial one. You'll want a fresh pair of eclipse glasses, though. Most lenses are only rated for 3 years. You'll be ready for the next big American solar eclipse of April 2024, though. The path of totality in that one spans from Texas to Maine. Elsewhere in the sky, if Monday's eclipse had occurred a week and a half later, when the moon is at apogee, or the furthest point in its orbit, the tinier moon would not be able to completely cover the sun. This produces an annular eclipse, leaving a ring of the sun's photosphere visible. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
All right, it's time to dive into the old email inbox and see what's happening here.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
Hi, everyone. I'm back after one show. All right, so we've got several emails to get to. Let's start with Jared Schmitz from who sent in a WeatherBrains listener survey response from St. Cloud, Wisconsin. He found the show through James Spann's notorious Twitter account and loves the variety of topics and input from knowledgeable pillars in weather. So thanks very much for tuning in and joining us. We appreciate that. Robert Long from Nashville, Tennessee says, I have a guest suggestion for you. WKRN Chief Meteorologist Danielle Breezy in Nashville. One of her claims to fame around here is that she went up and broadcasted from a plane during fire season a couple years ago in eastern Tennessee, which was very interesting around there. My suggestion would be to put her in an episode with an incident meteorologist to talk about fire weather forecasting and the Gatlinburg wildfire disaster. I would recommend Danielle to be considered as an alternate co-host for the show on the weeks that Aubrey or Nate can't attend. So thank you for submitting that, Robert Long. Appreciate that, Robert. Also,
I love somebody doing weather by the name of Breezy. That's just too cool.
Exactly. So is it her actual name, or did she change it?
We'll find out.
This one comes in from Robert Long. Also, it's a Facebook post that talks about air bombs. And did I have it up? I think I closed it. So the post says, this is from News Channel 5. Have you heard about this? Something called air bombs could be causing planes and ships to disappear. And they're talking about the Bermuda Triangle. And it was on the Science Channel's What on Earth show. Has anyone heard about that?
No, but I think it's this. It can't be air bombs. It's got to be No, I've not heard of that. I'd love to know more.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty interesting. I haven't seen anything else on it either. So, all right. And then let's see. John W. Wilkinson sent in this article. He said, I knew this would be too late to share on the show before Monday, but I think it's cool nonetheless. And it's it's information from NOAA about the HER model, the high resolution, super duper high resolution model. And it's basically, what do they call it? This algorithm for the model that would anticipate information with the eclipse occurring. And it's a temperature contour map of the cooling temperatures as the eclipse shadow made it from Oregon to South Carolina, which is pretty cool. So that was a cool site. And I don't know how the models really handled it. It was kind of a toss-up in our area today. I guess we weren't really sure how much it would really affect. And also Richard Cook sent in this email as a picture of his crappy Facebook weather app, which I don't know why Facebook is trying to get into this, because they're not going to be good at doing it either way. But yeah, so he said, as someone, and we all know Richard Cook lives in Scotland. I live on the Isle of Scotland. In the past week, Facebook has decided that we all live in Lewis, Missouri in the United States. So not just a different town, but completely different country. Please find the attached screenshot forecasting a high of 32 degrees Celsius, which I believe is around like 89, close to 90. But where I live, it has never reached this high since records began, with 28 Celsius being the highest ever temperature. Hopefully, Facebook will sort this glitch. And either if they sort it or not, they're still not going to be right. And we all know that. And I know Richard knows that too. So thanks for sending in those emails, those links, and your guest suggestions. We love to get those on email at weatherbrains.com. You can also follow us on the Twitter and the Facebook. We love to get those guest suggestions with also contact information on how to get a hold of that possible guest, what you like about the show, and some suggested guest topics, some show topics, whatever you want to send us. We love to get those emails.
We do. And let's do a weather roundup. See, everybody's bailed on us. Rick had to go. Brian had to go.
No.
I mean, they're just running like roaches. See, Kevin could stay here all night. He's got no 10 o'clock news to worry about.
Wait till you leave, and I'll crank up on social media and really get going. We'll be here till 2 a.m.
In the dark,
yeah.
relaxed.
Yeah. And if we didn't get Craig on the show, I was going to talk about the future, and Aubrey piqued our interest. She says in the chat room here, you have somebody you can't name but works in TV stations, thinks in 2 years the industry will change dramatically and half the stations won't be on the air anymore. Ooh.
That's some information that I got. Someone who works in web stuff with one of the TV companies, and I guess that is kind of the chatter that things are going to change drastically. So we know how everything's kind of going to demand between Netflix and Hulu and everything. So, that kind of got me thinking, are we just going to record segments? But at that point, I think 2 years really surprised me, because I still think we still have that. I don't even want to call them the older generation, because still 40 and up, 30 and up, I still think would watch a traditional newscast.
Yeah, I think all the predictions are exactly right, except the timing. I think the timing is going to be a lot. It's going to be longer, slower, and consequently, internally, because of that, going to be much more painful. It's going to be a gradual, downsizing and squeezing tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter until eventually it gives up. But I think we have a number of years more to go. You always got to go back. It's the old question: follow the money. And if you go back and you start to look at it from ultimately the advertiser standpoint, does it still make sense for them? And I think that it will beyond 2 years. I think the big benchmark, and I think I probably said this before years ago, is when targeting, well, I give a specific example, and I know I've told this story, but it's been years, when the car dealers are able to more effectively draw a circle of 7 miles, and I say 5 to 7 miles because that's what I was told by a car dealer. Most people buy a car from a dealer within 5 to 7 miles of their house. When they can draw that circle around their dealership and more effectively advertise digitally to people, customers that way, that will be the big turning point, and we're not quite there yet.
Well, I know even talking to my boss recently, I think just last week, he said, he just kind of made a comment between web and apps. And he said, our views on our app is, like 300 times what our views are on our actual website.
But, and I think this is actually one of our other bigger dangers, is if you go back, and boy, everybody needs to go. I was reading a review of this today, Tim Wu's book, The Attention Merchants. But if you go back and you look at, now I've lost my train of thought.
Hey, while Kevin gains his train of thought, I'm the lead and I got to go. So I know Aubrey's got to go. So Kevin, you got to wrap this thing up. You're the last man in here. So
okay.
You can talk all night long. I'll be listening tomorrow driving.
Yeah. Well, again, my brain got scrambled here, I guess, because I'm on vacation. But say the last point you just made, Aubrey, because maybe that triggered.
What did I just say?
General manager
the web app. Our app gets 300 times more. Yeah.
Yes. If you go back to the foundations of advertising and the attention merchants, and we'll go to newspapers specifically, one of the reasons that newspapers worked, there's good information there, there's community journalism, there's reporting on the city council and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they needed something to carry the ads, right? And that's what paid for it. And that's what still pays for it because subscriptions are going down so much. And so part of the history of this was you can cram, and I don't know what the numbers are, but let's say you can cram 500 ads into the Sunday paper. But you never can, and you can say, okay, and this was the Dallas Morning News example. They threw, I think, years I was down there, they threw between a little over 200,000 Sunday papers every week. So you cram 500 ads in there. You say we got 250,000 people getting the paper, but you were never able to accurately say how many people saw that particular ad in the entertainment section. And that was understood. Okay, we're throwing a bunch and some percentage we'll see. But the problem with a web page is you can't cram 500 ads in there. You can only put in a couple. And then you get this pushback, there's too many ads, people don't go, they take too long to download, all that kind of thing. But the model was you were charging for kind of, in a way, vapor. You never really knew how many people were watching. It was the same thing in television. Ratings are done by, 400 people and Nielsen ratings and all that kind of stuff. But you could never say for sure. It was just sort of accepted. Okay, well, it does seem to work, and we think we have this many people, and we can't really get any more specific than that. But now that we're able to get more specific, that's causing a bigger problem. And yes, we're getting the clicks, but the ads, or we're getting the traffic, but the ads are not getting the same kind of responses as they would on television. They don't draw as much attention. Banner ads are largely ignored, yada, yada, yada. So one of my greater fears for the digital side is that even though we get traffic, it's not going to generate enough money to support the infrastructure that was built on the old television model.
Okay.
Which is
I think that's a good point. But I think, also, you kind of look back to the history of, with email. When email came out, I'm sure people were like, oh, this is the end of the U.S. Post Office, and they may have had their struggles, but they're still around. The same thing with ebooks and Nooks and Kindles and things like that. And
Right.
e-readers. It's not the death of books, and even newspapers.
Right.
Newspapers, everyone said that they would be obsolete in 5 years, and they're still here. A lot of them did close. A lot of them are still struggling, but they're still here.
Yeah, well, and I'll argue that the post office argument is interesting because that has what I mentioned about TV stations is a higher infrastructure cost, and that's why they are in so much trouble and continuing to trend down. If you look at ebooks and whatnot, there's no infrastructure cost to that, so that's okay. You're not having to support giant printing presses and shipping companies to move these paper books from A to B and so on and so forth. So that one can thrive, but the infrastructure costs in a television station and the post office are quite a bit bigger. So I think that's where we're going to continue to see. And that's why I don't think it's 2 years from now. It's an evolution, and these people try and continue to evolve and figure it out. But it is going to be pretty difficult, I think.
Well.
Oh, well.
Backup plan?
The backup plan is to do picks of the week.
There you go.
Do you have one?
Yes, mine is the Mount Washington Weather Observatory in New Hampshire. Their Twitter handle, they always have some great stuff, and especially as we're heading toward fall, they're always going to share some great pictures and some very unusual temperatures and some good things like that.
Have you ever been up there?
I have not, and next year I am planning a trip to New England. My husband has never been, and I have an aunt in Vermont who invited us to come up, so I think we might take advantage of that and do that while we're up there next year.
Oh, and will that be in the fall? You can watch the colors?
It's really going to depend on if we start hearing of any weddings next year. We're going to have to kind of figure out the timing, but I'm thinking maybe either June or maybe late August, something.
The Mount Washington Observatory Road is a wonderful trip. I've done it once, and it's just fantastic. Anybody who goes to New England in the fall, I would caution to get your reservations often and early.
So you have to make your reservation.
Well, not for that, but if you're going to go, if you're going leaf peeping.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when I was a kid, I worked in a hotel outside of Boston, and there was one. Was it Columbus Day weekend? I guess is sort of the peak leaf time, and there was one year where the closest room that we could find to Boston was literally Schenectady, New York. All the hotels in New England were closed up. So I'll make that. Hey, you've got to go, don't you?
I do kind of have to go, and they're putting my graphic up, and I'm guessing they're asking for a mic check. So, hey guys, here's your mic check right now. We're about to end WeatherBrains. So
you go, and I'll close the show.
All right, Kevin, good talking to you, and I'll see you next week.
You too, Aubrey. Take care.
Enjoy vacation.
Thanks very much. My pick of the week is the Saltine Cracker Twitter tweet that was put out that I retweeted. So you can find that on my Twitter account. It's at Kevin Selly. And all the other picks of the week will be on the website that Brian so dutifully puts together every week. So I guess that's going to be it. I'm the last one here. So as we usually say, I am not James Spann. Have a great week, and God bless.
thank you. Can't show them all on television, but we showed a bunch of them. Let's see what's going on in here. See if anybody's still hanging in here. Ooh, they're all gone. Okay, so let's turn the camera back on. Hello to our friends that are watching on the WeatherBrains stream. The question I always have is, why are 11 people watching nothing? Maybe they're like me and they have no life. So great to have Craig Fugate on the show tonight, the FEMA director for a long time, and he was Florida EMA guy for a long time. And good to have Kevin on the show without having to worry about television. That was great. So again, thank you guys for listening. The audio version will be up here in a few hours. We'll see you guys next Monday night, 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. Y'all have a great week, and God bless.